Galatians 5 in ancient Hebrew thought is the focus of our discussion today.
Written by Paul, this letter addresses the Galatian followers, likely a mix of Jewish and Gentile believers in Yeshua, regarding disputes over keeping the Torah, the commandments, and instructions for maintaining the covenant at Mount Sinai, as well as the role of faith within Yahweh's covenant through Yeshua, our Messiah.
In ancient Hebrew thought, the world is not divided into material and spiritual realms like in Greek dualism. Instead, reality is unified under God's sovereignty, with life, statutes, and precepts that are deeply interconnected. The Torah is a covenantal gift, guiding Israel in living out God's will within the covenant relationship, not a legalistic burden or a contract as taught by Moses during their exodus from Egypt.
Yes, that's an important point to consider now. Ancient Hebrew thought comes from Moses, a prophet of Yahweh, who taught the Israelites about Yahweh as revealed to him by Yahweh. Only the teachings revealed to Moses, the prophets, Yeshua, and the apostles are Yahweh approved, and they all agree. That's why we aim to return to the original teachings and instructions without outside influences.
So Paul, as a converted Jewish Pharisee and thinker educated under Gamaliel, having received revelations from Yeshua, would have approached these issues from the perspective of emphasizing covenant fidelity, rather than abstract metaphysics.
Yes, that's right. Now, the main themes of Galatians 5, freedom, the Ruach, and the Torah, must be understood within this context. The chapter contrasts living by Yahweh's empowering breath with the works of the flesh, actions that disrupt covenantal harmony, and emphasizes Yeshua's teachings as the fulfillment of Torah's relational and ethical purpose.
The first key theme Paul mentions is freedom in the covenant. In verses 1:13 to 15, Paul begins, "For freedom Messiah has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery."
In Greek philosophy, freedom is viewed as personal autonomy or liberation from external constraints. It's also important to point out that, unlike Greek individualism, Hebrew thought emphasizes community. In ancient Hebrew thought, however, freedom is grounded in the communal covenant, freedom from chaos or oppression to live rightly within Yahweh's covenant. The yoke of slavery likely refers to a misunderstanding of the Torah as a strict legal system separate from its covenantal purpose, influenced by Gentile converts' exposure to Greco-Roman legalism and by Judaizers demanding strict Torah observance for salvation, as taught by the Sadducees.
The Torah is not about slavery, but a way of life, as shown in Deuteronomy 30:15 through 20. Paul warns against using freedom as an opportunity for the flesh in verse 13, a term often misunderstood through Greek dualism as the physical body versus the soul. However, in Hebrew, Basar, translated as flesh, refers to human nature in its weakness or rebellion against God, not the body itself. Paul's call to serve one another through love in verse 13 echoes the Torah's core command to love Yahweh and neighbor found in Leviticus 19:18 and Deuteronomy 6:5, which he says fulfills the whole Torah in verse 14.
This reflects the Hebrew view of the Torah as a relational framework for living in harmony with Yahweh and others. And this insight into freedom underscores that it is not a personal license, but rather the ability to live faithfully within the covenant, embodying God's will through love and community.
The next important theme in Galatians 5 we want to explore is that Paul contrasts living by the Ruach with the desires of the Basar in verses 16 to 25.
First, in Greek thought, this could be misinterpreted as a dualistic struggle between the body and the soul. However, from the beginning, Hebrew thought has understood the Ruach as Yahweh's life-giving breath and presence that empowers people to live according to his covenant, as shown in Ezekiel 36:26 to 27. The Basar reflects human tendencies toward breaking the covenant, listed as works of the flesh in verses 19 through 21, such as idolatry, conflict, and immorality, actions that disturb shalom's community, peace, and wholeness.
The fruit of the Ruach, in verses 22 to 23, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, describes the character of a life aligned with God's covenant. The fruit of the Spirit, read as Stoic virtues, was introduced by early church fathers, distancing themselves from anything Jewish. However, in Hebrew thought, they are active relational qualities reflecting God's character within the covenant community. These are not abstract virtues, but active expressions of covenant fidelity, reflecting Yahweh's attributes as seen in Exodus 34:6-7. The Ruach enables the community to embody the Torah's intent, not to abolish it as stated in verse 23. Against such things there is no precept or statute.
This insight into the breath of Yahweh, Ruach, represents Yahweh's empowering presence, which transforms the heart as described in Jeremiah 31:33 to foster a life of covenantal righteousness, not a rejection of the Torah, but its fulfillment through active communal love.
The last central theme is the commandments, precepts, and instructions of our Messiah, found in verses 6, 14, and 18.
Paul emphasizes that neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love in verse 6. In Hebrew thought, emunah, often translated as faith, is not mere belief but active trust and faithfulness to Yahweh's covenant. Circumcision, a covenant sign in Genesis 17:10-14, was debated among the Galatian followers, likely due to Judaizers insisting it was necessary for salvation.
Paul argues that the essence of the covenant is not external rituals, but a heart transformed by faith and love, which fulfills the Torah, as stated in verse 14. The phrase, the commandments of our Messiah, implied in verse 14 and explicit in chapter 6, verse 2, aligns with the Hebrew concept of Torah as a way of life. Yeshua's teachings, rooted in the Torah, emphasize love and mercy as the weightier matters of the instructions, in Matthew 23:23.
Paul's point is that living by the Ruach fulfills the Torah's purpose, as stated in Romans 8:4, since the Ruach writes Yahweh's Torah on the heart, as shown in Jeremiah 31:33. This insight into the teachings of our Messiah is the Torah lived out through the Messiah's example of love and faithfulness, empowered by the Ruach, not a new concept replacing the old.
For us to summarize Galatians 5, it presents a vision of covenantal life empowered by the Ruach, where freedom is the ability to live out Yahweh's Torah through love and faithfulness. Paul addresses the Galatians' confusion about Torah observance, emphasizing that true covenant fidelity comes from a heart transformed by the Ruach, not from external rituals like circumcision. Paul reinterprets the Torah through the lens of the Messiah's life and teachings.
The Torah is eternal, as stated in Psalm 119, verse 89, and Paul sees its fulfillment in a life of faith and love, rather than in rigid external observance. The works of the Basar are covenant-breaking behaviors that disrupt shalom, while the fruit of the Ruach embodies Yahweh's character and community. Paul's call to serve one another and avoid destructive behaviors, bite and devour one another, reflects the Hebrew value of shalom, where individual actions affect the community's covenantal harmony.
And the law of Messiah fulfills the Torah's relational and ethical intent, aligning with the Hebrew view of Torah as God's life-giving instruction, and by focusing on Hebrew concepts such as covenant, shalom, and the Ruach as Yahweh's life-giving breath. We avoid these distortions and align ourselves with Yahweh's worldview.
If you listeners have areas of interest you'd like to explore further, questions or comments, please don't hesitate to let us know.